Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this IBPS Clerk and RBI Assistant 2017 Winning Techniques live session brought to you by TalentSprint. So I'm so glad, again, you guys are here this morning. And I know yesterday I said it'll start at 11, but the rains have not been favorable here. So just to put it out there, we'll be having sessions scheduled this whole week at 11:30. Just didn't want to take the risk. So that's about it. And Amit, Rahul, who else is there? Pavani, Gurpreet, Nitish, Sindhu. Okay, some more people. Sorry, let me look at the chat. There's a whole lot of conversation going there. Silence speaks. Yesterday, so I'm coming across all these unique names. Yesterday, I think I saw some name called Crazy, and then today there's Silence Speaks. Interesting. So welcome. Yes, Aditya, I am. So you know the situation here, right? It's just crazy. The traffic is crazy. The rains are non-stop. So it's expected to rain for a couple of more days. So hopefully you guys were there yesterday. We looked at fill in the blanks, and today's topic is close passage. Close passage is just a larger version, a larger context as compared to fill in the blanks, right? And we'll pretty much apply the same strategies for close passage as well. Vanakkam Raj. Oh, okay. Silence Speaks is Tanya. Okay. Pseudonym. Fine. So shall we get started? Yeah? So what do we do first for close passage? We always skim the passage, right? That's the strategy that we apply. The winning technique, just like how we saw collocations as a technique for fill in the blanks, right? Here also, you can pretty much apply collocations, but close passage is more about context, so there'll always be clues in the context. So it's good to be, so the technique that you constantly need to apply for close passage is to be aware of the context as a whole, right? Pay attention, understand the meaning, what is a central idea or theme of the passage. So that will kind of help us. So always look out for clues, from the preceding context, from the following sentence. That's what we need to keep looking at. Yeah, Kirtana. So as I said, 11:30 for this week. Yeah. So let me share the PPT. We'll get started. Okay. So this is our passage. So I want you to let's quickly skim this passage, right? Skim is nothing but a quick read. So let's do that, and then we'll look at the options. Let's understand what this passage is about. The history of developed industrial countries has been different. The industrial dash succeeded because of the availability of an dash in cheap supply of fossil fuels. When oil producers asserted their right to fixed prices, these countries were dashed to discover how myopic was their dash, that they had the right to unlimited quantities of fuel. However, the adjustment process has been dashed for the industrialized countries because minor economies in consumption enable them to control the growth in demand and dash their losses by passing on the higher costs of energy through exports. So developing countries are dashed, both sides dash the high costs of oil and the higher costs of imports of manufacture and industrial raw materials. We have neither margins of waste nor the wherewithal to meet the increasing expenses. So obviously, you will be reading this in your mind and not this loud, right? So you'll save time. So ideally, you should be able to skim this passage in about 30 seconds, yeah, to a minute. It shouldn't take more than a minute for you, 45 seconds max. So we have an idea about what this passage is, right? Now let's look at the options for, we start with the first blank. The history of developed industrial countries has been different. The industrial dash succeeded because of the availability of an. So if you look at it, there are quite a bit of changes that are happening, right? I mean, some of the clues from the context for us is, let me just change the font here. The adjustment process, right? Trying to control the growth and demand. So I want you to keep all this in mind. So which means there's a lot of changes that are happening, right? So from the given options, I have evolution, devolution, evolution, and revolution. Obviously, the first one is, I still have, let me look at the chat. Okay, most of you started giving me options, answers for the second blank as well. Let's finish the first blank first. Evolution, we all know, right? We're talking about a gradual change in the characteristics of a population. It could be animals or plants over successive generations. So we're talking about a gradual development. We know this is not the word to fit the blank. What is devolution? Devolution is transfer of power, right? Something like a degeneration or delegating, transfer of power. Volution, have you even come? Volution, maybe a lot of you may not even be aware of this, right? It's a rolling or revolving motion. Okay, so the only one that we all know will fit the context here is revolution, because a revolution talks about a radical change in something, right? There is something that happens as a cycle of successive events or changes. So we're talking about either a sudden or a radical change in something. And that's what we need. The Industrial Revolution succeeded because of the availability of an. And the second one, we all know because we have a very easy clue from the context, which is our indefinite article an. And if I look at my options, I'll have to obviously choose a word that starts with a vowel, right? So I can quickly eliminate L, R, and M, which is luxuriant, redundant, and mutant, which are all consonants. Does abundant fit in this blank meaningfully? It has to, because that's the only one that can go before an, right? An abundant and cheap supply of fossil fuel. So the Industrial Revolution succeeded because of the availability of, so there was something that was in abundance, the fossil fuels, and it was cheap. So that's why it succeeded. Let's move on. So first two blanks seem pretty easy, right? It's not too much of a challenge at all to identify the options. Let's look at the third blank. When oil producers asserted their right to fix prices, these countries were dash to discover how myopic was their dash that they had the right to unlimited quantities of fuel. Now let's look at the third and fourth blank together. Yeah, let's look at this entire context. So they're saying, can you identify, okay, I'll give you about 30 seconds. Can you identify a clue word in this context which will help us figure out which word will fit the blank correctly? Third blank. My options are excited, incited, startled, and amazed. When oil producers asserted their right to fix prices, these countries were dashed to discover how myopic was their dash that they had the right to unlimited quantities of fuel. Yeah? So some of you are coming back and saying C, some of you are coming back and saying D. Okay, so let's look at clue, right? Is this context saying that the countries, right, were they right in their belief, in their assumption, or in their thesis, or in their premise, whatever the fourth option is, right? What can it be? Yes, very good. Malik and Avinash. Myopic and myopic is the clue word, right? What's myopic? Short-sighted, right? You're not thinking ahead. You're not thinking about, okay, what can be something that we will face in the future. You're lacking foresight or scope. That's our clue word. So obviously, they can't be excited about that, right? Because they were short-sighted. So myopic being a clue word, I'm going to write this here, which means lacking foresight, right? So there's nothing to be excited about lacking foresight, illogical. Incited is an unrelated word, right? To incite means to provoke, to stir up. I don't need that word here in the context. To urge on somebody, unrelated. Startled. So if somebody comes in from behind and says, boo, right, then I'm startled. So a sudden frightening, I mean, I'm frightened or I'm surprised, that's to be startled. Is that what will go in the context? A lot of you came back and said part C. What about part D, amazed? What can be the context meaning of amazed here? Right? So amazed can mean that, you know, they were stunned because they did not have the foresight, or they lacked the foresight to see whatever, that something of theirs, they believed that they had the right to unlimited quantities of fuel, but their vision was short-sighted, right? So going back, it cannot be startled, though startled and amazed can pretty much give you the same answer in terms of sudden surprise, but we are not looking at somebody who is frightened or somebody who is alarmed, but what we're looking at is somebody who is stunned, right? Or somebody who is, what can I say? Overwhelmed, right? That's the word. Overwhelmed with surprise, or even shocked, right? But startled, on the other hand, gives us words in terms of, you know, alarmed or frightened. And yes, surprise too. But what will be a better word given the context, right? It would be amazed. So these countries were amazed to discover how myopic, how short-sighted was their, what's for the fourth blank? I have belief, assumption, thesis, and premise. What can it be? See guys, let's say, see some of you are coming back and saying assumption. Now what's an assumption? An assumption is you believe something to be true out of which a conclusion can be drawn. That's an assumption, right? So there's understand what assumption and belief is. So let's go back to the context. So I'm saying an assumption is something that you assume to be true, but from which a conclusion can be drawn. The context is not really giving us a conclusion that can be drawn, but what it's saying is something they believed this to be true, or they accepted this as the truth. What is that? That they had the right to unlimited quantities of fuel. Has anybody come back and given me C and D? We know that can't be the case, right? Because this is not a proposition that is maintained by an argument. So it's definitely not a thesis. That's what a thesis is, right? We don't need that. What's a premise? Again, a proposition upon which an argument is based, or from which a conclusion is drawn. So please remember, a premise is an argument based on which a conclusion is drawn. Same thing, assumption. Assumption is something that is believed to be true, out of which a conclusion is drawn. Now, the context doesn't give us a conclusion to be drawn. So the most effective word would be belief. They believed this to be true, that they had the right to unlimited quantities of fuel. So the right answer is A, and not B or D. Are you following? So moving on. So their belief that they had the right to unlimited quantities of fuel. However, the adjustment process has been dashed for the industrialized countries. What are my options? Relative easy, relatively easy, relatively easier, relative easier. Okay, I'm just going to write it down, just so that, because most of you are confused between premise and assumption. So let me put, a premise is a proposition, okay, upon which an argument is based. or from which a conclusion is drawn. Same thing for an assumption. What's an assumption? You believe something to be true, right? It's a statement assumed to be true from which a conclusion is drawn. Right? So the context here is not talking about any conclusion drawn, but it's only talking about something that they believe to be true. Now let's look at 5. A lot of you are coming back and saying it's either B or C. Now, please understand, 5th one, there is comparison happening. Yes or no? The comparison is between who and who? Can somebody quickly point out? Yeah, the comparison is between the developed industrial countries, right? So these countries were amazed to discover how myopic was their belief that they had the right to unlimited quantities of fuel. However, the adjustment process has been, the only option that gives me comparison, comparative degree is IER, both these. But C is absolutely perfect with the adverb, which is modifying the adjective easier and not relative easier, right? So I'll have to choose. So the comparison between those and the industrialized countries has been relatively easier. So option C for the 5th blank. Because minor economies in consumption enable them to control the growth in demand and dash their losses. What are my options for 6th one? Make up, make out, make for, make from. In fact, Vijay, I would say this is a, like it starts off from an easy to a moderate to maybe it will turn into a difficult level passage, right? Because the first 2 blanks were pretty much easy. The next 2 blanks seemed a little tougher. So when you use makeup, all of us are familiar with makeup. It's definitely not that makeup here, right? We're talking about you make up for something. But if you look at that context, makeup, it always follows with the preposition for. Do we have that in the context? Let's go back. Does it say and make up for their losses? No, for is not there. So I really can't use makeup because it's incorrect, right? I'm going to take a minute to explain the previous blank for Sumit, okay? So basically, Sumit, if you look at the context, however, the adjustment process has been dash for the industrialized countries. So, however, your antonym hint word is bringing in a comparison between the other countries, right? These countries and the industrialized countries. So, because there is a comparison, we need a comparative degree, which is IER, easier and not just easy. Are you following? And how easier was it? Relatively easier. So relatively as an adverb is modifying or describing the adjective easier. Are you following? Moving on. 6th one, a lot of you came back and said A. That's fine, don't worry about it. Crazy. Make out, on the other hand, what is, again, we all know these are phrasal verbs and they can have different meanings in different contexts. See, make out, I'm going to like go ahead and clear this so that we can get some space. Okay. Make out means you are either dealing with a situation, to deal with a situation, usually in a successful way. Okay. See, make out as a phrasal verb again has different meanings in various contexts, right? I can say, did you just make out what she said? Which means, did you understand what she said, right? Or you can say, I can make out the outline of that distant object. I think it looks like a flying saucer, right? So, can you discern, can you figure out what's happening? So, make out has different meanings in different contexts. One of the meanings I had listed there, saying to deal with the situation usually in a successful way. And that's exactly what the context is also saying, right? Make up also has different meanings. Option A, a lot of you came back and said, right? This guy is making up the story, or he made up that story, which means he's inventing something, right? It's not true, he's just making it up. That's one phrasal verb. Or I can say, this particular book is made up of 10 short stories put together, which means it combines and forms. That's another meaning of make up. Yeah, let's go back. Or let's say Naresh and Salil are having a fight, okay, and then Tanya intervenes and she's like, hey guys, why don't you just forget your differences and make up, right? Which means become friends again. Don't worry about your arguments, right? Leave your differences aside. So that's another. So in the context, I really can't use make up, and you can make up for a loss, but I don't have the preposition, so I will not choose option A, out. Make out, on the other hand, is giving us this meaning, and that's exactly the meaning that we need. What about make for and make from? Make for, if you ask me, let me think of an example sentence. I can say, okay, I picked up my umbrella and made for the door. So made for here, make for is, I'm saying I moved towards, some sort of a movement towards a particular place, right? That's not the meaning that I need in this context. It can also means, make for can also means like producing a result or a situation, or you're helping somebody achieve something, right? That's also another meaning, but again, that's not the meaning we need in a context, in this context. So all the other options, make from is not even correct as a construction. Something is made from something, but that's not the meaning that we need here. Yeah? So, given the options, the right one is make out. To deal with the situation usually in a successful way. Let's go back to the context. Let's look at the sixth one. What are they dealing with here? Minor economies in consumption enable them to control the growth in demand and make out their losses by passing on the higher costs of energy through exports. So they are dealing with these losses. How? By passing on the higher costs of energy through exports. That's how they are making out the losses. That makes sense. So, developing countries are dash both sides. So, developing countries are dash both sides. Dash the high cost. What do I have? What do I have for seventh blank? Hit at, hit from, struck as, struck from. So usually the collocation is you either get hit on both sides or you get hit from both sides. That's the collocation. So go back to the context. What do we have? Hit at, hit from, struck as, and struck from. Strike is to hit sharply. Not the most effective word given the context. right? If you strike somebody, usually you're striking them with a hand or a fist. So yeah, or a weapon. So it has to be hit from both sides. So when you say hit, you're talking about something that is affected especially adversely. So let's put that there, because most of you are coming back and saying strike as well. Strike, hit, right? So when I say strike, I'm talking about a sharp hit, either you're using your hand or a fist or some sort of a weapon to strike someone, or you're implementing something, right? Hit, on the other hand, is we're saying something gets affected, right? To affect, especially in a negative way, adversely. So given these two meanings, so I can say the company was hit hard by the recession, right? The same context here. We're saying the developing countries are hit from both sides. They are affected adversely from both sides, dash the high costs of oil. What are my options for 8th blank? Withal, wherewithal, all over. Struck can have different meanings in different contexts, Salil, in fact. Right, that's the only thing. If you notice, have you noticed in the surrounding context, I again have wherewithal here. The only difference is in 8th blank, okay, in the 8th blank, wherewithal is acting as what? It's acting as a sentence connector, right? But here, it's a noun form. We have neither margins of waste nor the wherewithal. Nor the wherewithal meaning, nor the means, especially financial means. So here also, both sides, not withal, not all over, but wherewithal. So what does wherewithal here mean in the 8th blank? It means just with or with which. Substitute that blank with. So basically they're saying developing countries are hit from both sides with the high costs of oil and the higher costs of imports of manufacture and industrial raw materials. Not all over, Himanshu and Nimu, for the 8th blank, are hit from both sides, not all over the high costs. What are they hit with? Right, the remaining context in that sentence is talking about what are they hit with, what are they affected by? The high costs of oil and the higher costs of imports and manufacture. Are you following? Please try and understand the developing countries are affected adversely both sides with the reason being, these are the reasons, this is what they are hit by. High cost of oil, 1, higher costs of imports of manufacture and industrial raw materials. They are not hit from both sides all over the high cost. That doesn't make sense. So, like I said, in the 8th blank, wherewithal is acting like a conjunction, like a sentence connector, and the meaning that it's giving is with. In the surrounding context, the last sentence, if you see, we have neither margins of waste nor the wherewithal. There, wherewithal is acting as a noun, which means the financial means. So I don't know, I'm sure when you started off this closed passage, you would have definitely got the first 2 blanks correct, right? Relatively easier. But the remaining 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th is where the confusion started and all of us you may have got stuck there in those remaining blanks. I don't know actually if we use withal at all, if you ask me. I do think we use withal. It means, I think, in addition to something, Vidal, that could be one meaning. Like a something that you can consider further. Yeah, maybe you can look it up. It's both these words, in fact, are not very commonly used. I mean, people don't use it, at least conversationally. I haven't heard people use Vidal and where Vidal, right? So we saw two meanings of wherewithal, where one was acting as a sentence connector, like I said, and the other one was acting as a noun, right? Because we know that one word can have different meanings, and vidal, I just gave you the meaning. See, one thing I'm sure is whether it's addressing a context or looking at clues within the context, I'm sure you're looking at understanding the meaning that the context is. That's something that you constantly have to apply as a habit, as a practice, right? Yeah, I'm sure most of you would have got only the first two, which were relatively easier as compared to the remaining blanks. For the remaining blanks, we have to look at context. We have to zero in on clue words from the context and then figure out the meaning. So it's okay. Don't worry about how many marks you got. The idea is you know how to differentiate, you know how to look at context, you know how to identify words, and I'm sure wherewithal is a new word. A lot of you probably don't even know what that means, right? Because we haven't heard people use it. So yeah, the reason why I chose this passage again is also because we also have to be prepared for a difficult level passage just in case we are surprised during the exam. But hopefully, okay, sorry Vijay, the first two might have also been difficult for a lot of people, I agree. So if the passage is easier, great, we'll do really well. If the passage is slightly complex or complicated, we still have to apply all these techniques, which is look at context. What is the context meaning saying? There was one or two collocations that we saw, right? Yeah. So don't worry about it. Tomorrow's topic is, I think, spot error, if I'm not wrong. Spot error. So I'll see you guys tomorrow, same time, meaning 11:30. Yeah. No, the idea is you're always learning something, right? You either get to learn a new word or you get to learn to how to approach context. You also get to learn to be prepared to address difficult level questions or patterns, right? So you'll also have to be you'll also have to be smart in choosing your questions during the exam. So if you feel, because you're the only one who knows what level you're at, right? I don't know what level is Kohila or Vijay or Sindhu. You know your level. So you decide to answer a specific question if you're absolutely, what do I say, positive about the answer. Otherwise, the smart thing to do is to skip so you don't get negatively marked. Yeah? So thank you again for actively participating. I'll see you guys tomorrow at 11:30 on another topic. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.